Next, we got opportunity zones. Very, this has kind of been in the news. So opportunity zones, investment vehicle that enables a seller to defer taxes on the gains by reinvesting those gains into a qualified opportunity fund. Typically, economically distressed areas is where those are located around the country. A few limitations of it, some limits to capital gains deferral, and I know, Greg, you'll dive into that. No control over investments in terms of the asset itself, and risk of not being able to sell the developed property at a profit, which is huge, right? You're kind of betting on the growth side of things, and if you can't, realize that, it wasn't worth it. So, Greg, if you want to really dive into the nitty gritty of opportunity zones.
Sure. So, opportunity zones are really kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to tax mitigation strategies that are codified and approved by the IRS. So, how do they work and what do they do and what are their incentives and stuff like that? So they were created under the President Trump's administration, and it was codified in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed during his administration. And it created what they call opportunity zones, which were meant to spur investment in undercapitalized communities. And any corporation or individual with capital gains can qualify. And that means that you could sell real estate, you could sell a business, or you could sell appreciated stock and reinvest into an opportunity zone to mitigate taxes. So some of there are three benefits really for investing unrealized capital gains in opportunity zones. Number one, temporary deferral of taxes on your capital gains. So investors can sell an existing asset and have a capital gain exposed, but you would just do a normal sale. You don't necessarily have to. The one thing about the opportunity zones, if I can back up for just a second, is opportunity zones are really the only structure that can be a bailout for you after the fact. In other words, if I just sold my building and I didn't pay attention to what the tax problem was going to be, and it already closed and I already have the money, and then you said, oh my God, now I'm learning what my tax problem is going to be. You could still, place your capital gains or a portion thereof into an opportunity zone as long as you do so within 9 months after the sale of your asset. So it is one that can kind of serve as a bailout club if you, made the mistake of not properly planning ahead of time. That could be one advantage to an opportunity zone. So what it does is it number one, you don't have to put all of your capital gains into an opportunity zone. You can put a portion of them, right? And whatever you put in will give you temporary capital gains deferral, but at this point it's very short term. So when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was created, and I think it was a little short-sighted in this one respect, they said that you have to you can defer your taxes for the lesser of 5 years or through December 31st, 2026, which is now only 2 years from now. So when it was created, you probably had a 7 or 8 year window. So the lesser of 5 years or, December 31st, 2026, so anybody that did that in the first couple of years, this type of investment, they were kind of covered. They would get typically a full 5 year deferral. Unless they change the law, which I think they should, but they haven't done it so far, and I haven't really heard any rumblings on Capitol Hill that that's on their agenda at this point. But right now, you could defer the capital gains on what you just sold for the next 2 years. Well, 3 years. So this is the end of 2023, just to date stamp our webinar here. So you would have, if you did this now, you have 24, 25, 26. You could have potential 3 years of capital gains, at which time you have to pay the capital gains tax on what you sold earlier. So you got to be careful about making sure that you understand what that tax is going to be and have enough money available to pay the IRS, because they're not going to want to wait for their money. But one of the things that they will do is they'll give you a 10% reduction on your capital gains rate. So you will have to pay capital gains on what you sold, but let's say you're a 20% capital gains payer at the federal level, by the end of 2026, they'll hit you with you'll pay 10% federal plus whatever your state rate is based on your total income. So that could be still up to maybe 20% in total, depending on what state you live in. So that's at least a little bit of a break. Then, going back to, opportunity zones and really what they are. So the opportunity zones are basically an identification. It's like we've all heard the term flood map, when it comes to insurance. Am I in a flood zone? Do I have to have flood insurance or hurricane insurance or whatever, earthquake insurance? They've got these maps stipulated. So what the federal government did is they asked all the states to participate to identify zones of property and land within the country that are designated zones that typically have lower income, higher poverty rates, higher unemployment rates than tracts that would be non-designated. So about 12% of U.S. Census tracts are considered opportunity zones for those reasons. So what they really intended for this to do was to create incentives for the private sector and individuals to invest capital into underserved, underdeveloped, or blighted areas, both urban and rural, right? And so that was, by giving these tax breaks, that was an incentive to go in and try to gentrify, dilapidated, rundown areas within the country, and that's the whole point of it, and that's the incentive. So great idea, actually, because and a lot of areas are being improved as a result of this. So, I often use the example of, maybe a developer or a syndicator that's created one of these opportunity zone funds has identified an opportunity tract in downtown Detroit near the water that's old, dilapidated warehouses and seedy area, and they want to kind of tear that out, and they want to put shopping, dining, retail, apartments and condos and things of that nature to kind of spruce it up, and a lot of us live in communities where we've had some blighted towns or communities or downtown areas that were once really couldn't go there after dark, and now they're beautiful and everybody wants to flock there. So those are the types of projects that they invest into. So what happens is you invest, you can sell your asset, you got a capital gain, you want to mitigate that, at least push off the capital gain and maybe lower the rate by investing money into an opportunity zone. And then you'll identify, because there's a number of them around. Individual sponsors are putting together projects, and you can kind of shop around either by talking with qualified investment advisors who operate in this space, or go online and sometimes you'll run into individual sponsors that are marketing their particular projects or whatever. Then you invest in that. You'll owe your capital gains tax, but you'll get a discount on your tax rate at the end of 2026. Developer is going to be going through a process, which is normal, identifying, acquiring property, going through city, county, state permits and reviews, all architectural, and then development. So what you often find with an opportunity zone, it's not 100% true in all cases, but what you typically find is if you're looking for cash flow, you're not typically going to get cash flow in the early years of this thing, because it's usually tearing something down and building something up and then renting it, stabilizing it to now create cash flow where they can potentially start making distributions back to the investors. So it's not something that usually you're going to be eligible for immediate cash flow from those investments. So keep that in mind, if you're considering this, or if you need cash flow and you like the opportunity zone concept, try to find one. Often oil and gas is a good space. There's some opportunity zones actually in oil and gas, believe it or not, that do pay current consistent cash flow and income. So then once you're invested, the typical opportunity zone is going to run, 10 years or maybe a little bit more, right, by design, because what the government gives you is an additional tax break for keeping your money in the opportunity zone. Generally, they're fairly illiquid anyway. You can't just get in and out. You got to be accredited investor, like you have to be with the Delawares as well, because they don't want people investing their money that are going to have some, some desperate need to withdraw that money in 1, 2, or 3 short years because it's funded, it's illiquid, it's in the project, right? They can't just pull money out willy-nilly. So you're going to have to hold that property for a little bit. Now, if you hold the investment is ongoing for 5 years, you'll start to get forgiveness on some of the capital gains that's accruing inside of the new investment, right? So you start over with a new basis. And then if you hold it for 5 years, another way to put it is if you understand step up in basis, which is if I die owning an appreciated asset, then my heir is going to receive that asset at the market value when I die. That's called step up in basis. So if they were to sell it at that point in time, they wouldn't have any capital gains to deal with. They would get a step up in basis. So a good way to kind of describe how the opportunity zone works is after you hold it for 5 years, you'll get kind of a 10% step up in basis. In other words, they'll ratchet up your cost basis by 10%. So you have less taxable amount built into the deal. If you hold it from 7 years to not quite 10 years, you'll get an incremental ratchet up. So if you held it 5 years, you would get a 10% step up. If you hold it 7 years, you get 15%. If you hold the investment for a full 10 years, and then the project is sold and you're paid out, you'll get a full step up in basis. You won't pay capital gains on the second property. So that's the opportunity zone. So I hope that makes sense for everybody. And that's really the core benefit. So keep in mind, opportunities are the new kids on the block. There's a lot of independent sponsors, syndicators that are putting these things together. Not everybody's got a track record. There are some shysters in the game, no doubt. And so you got to be very careful about doing your due diligence. If you're looking at opportunity zones, make sure you work with a qualified investment advisor, maybe a lawyer, maybe a CPA, people that know this space and can advise you accordingly because they're not equal. Everything's different, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of individual syndicators putting these things together. So, and then the tax benefits. Don't forget, you will pay capital gains on what you sold. You'll just get to push that off and use that money for the next few years before you have to pay it, but you will get a discount on your tax rate. Hold the investment long enough, not usually early cash flow. Cash flow could come later, but you can get capital gains forgiveness incrementally as you go. And if you hold the new investment for at least 10 years, you wouldn't pay capital gains when that project is sold and you get paid back. So, but then again, another risk is, keep in mind, they're building and developing in blighted areas. It's not like investing into the bright, shiny areas that already are very solid and their appreciation and growth is continuing. You're investing in kind of the blighted areas. They're not always seedy or anything like that, but they are, as I said before, these areas that are designated as opportunity zones are where there is lower than average income, higher than average poverty rates, higher than average unemployment rates. Those are the types of areas where your investments are going into. So if you have an appetite or a stomach for that, it's just a little bit riskier than if you were going into some place that was well established and pretty stable and solid. So that being said, I know that's a lot, but let me take a breath so Paul can shoot us down into the next one.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, and we see 2 of these questions about opportunity zones, we'll kind of do that in a little bit, guys, so just hold tight for a second. But one of the things that we recently had, I want to give live examples as we're going through it because we deal with all these cases. So one of our clients recently was selling his business located out in the East Coast, and for him, cash flow was huge. So he's selling his asset, that's a singular asset. He needs to be able to replace that income immediately in some way. So when he was looking at opportunity zones, or our strategy, which is the Deferred Sales Trust, the option, for him, the answer to him was very clear, and it was Deferred Sales Trust because of he needed to be able to replace that income immediately. So one of the things Greg touched on there in that great information was one of the limitations is, other than, for example, Greg gave an example of oil and gas, for folks that need immediate replacement of income and that cash flow, you'll have that issue with opportunity zones where you don't have that, of course, with a Deferred Sales Trust.